We have Matthew Bloom. He is an associate professor of surgery, and he is the general surgeon and critical care intensivist at Cedars-Sinai. We also have joining us Mark Wolff, PhD. He is the chief health and life sciences analytics strategist at SAS. We have Brad Genereaux. He's the medical imaging alliance manager at NVIDIA, and Michael Liou, the VP strategy and growth of Chooch AI. To start, Michael and Brad will dive into the benefits of computer vision and other AI technologies that are in the marketplace today for both patients and providers. Then we'll go into the advances of AI in healthcare we're expecting to see over the next 5 years. And finally, we'll end with a Q&A. If you have questions during the conversation, please type them in the chat below, and we'll go ahead and answer those at the end. To start, I'd like to ask Michael to talk about AI and computer vision in healthcare. Michael?
Great, thank you, Tiffany, and thanks everyone for joining. My name is Michael Liou, VP of Strategy and Growth at Chooch AI, and let me just walk through a couple slides to kind of set the stage here. So Chooch AI is a computer vision company. We're based here in Silicon Valley, and we developed a platform that is designed to identify both objects and actions. So in the healthcare context, that means we can detect scalpels, forceps, wheelchairs. We can also detect patient behavior, such as coughing, falling down, trying to get up. We're a horizontal and very versatile platform. And what we've done here is we are able to take not only visible spectrum video, such as what we see every single day, but we also are able to ingest other types of formats, such as X-ray, CT scan, and MRI. We've developed a kind of a unique approach to computer vision. And what Chooch AI platform has done is actually integrated the dozens of steps involved in 3 key disciplines in order to deliver visual AI computing on the edge. And those 3 disciplines are dataset generation, model training, and edge device management. If you think about the first 2, dataset training as well as model training, these are very tedious and time-consuming tasks. And typically, when you combine these 2 processes together, we're talking about development and delivery of computer vision models to the edge. The cycle tends to be somewhere anywhere from 9 to 12 months. It's fairly lengthy. And what Chooch AI has done is actually created a no-code platform and a set of internal tools for rapid prototyping and AI model training, where we have actually delivered models in as quickly as short as 2 weeks. Now, the third element, edge computing, is quite critical, especially within healthcare, right, where privacy, HIPAA compliance, and data protection need to be observed and are quite critical. Here, we have kind of orchestrated the use of GPUs, cameras, containerized models, multi-stream video, as well as the actual inferences, all on edge devices. And currently, we are running on NVIDIA GPUs, both in the cloud and on the edge. And we are currently members of the NVIDIA Inception, Clara Guardian Healthcare, as well as the Metropolis program. I wanted to touch upon some of the broad applications of computer vision within healthcare that we have, where we have delivered solutions at Chooch AI. They range anything from a radiology that you typically think of when you think about AI within the field of healthcare, to patient behavior monitoring in terms of is a patient coughing, are they lying down, are they sitting up, fall detection in hospitals or nursing homes, PPE detection, and even behavior such as hand washing before a procedure. But I want to discuss a little bit what we've actually done with a major Fortune 500 company in medical devices. We've actually delivered AI to what we call smart operating room. And here what we're doing is actually helping relieve the IT burden that nurses and doctors have face every day with operating. And we've done everything ranging from the more mundane in terms of counting how many times the doors open and close, when the room is cleaned, when the patient's built in, to more sophisticated actions such as tracking scalpels, forceps, sponges and gauzes, entering and exiting the body cavity, determining when the patient drape is up or down, and when anesthesia starts and stops. So as you can see, the applications are quite myriad within just this particular vertical itself. But let me stop there and hand it back to Tiffany. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. NVIDIA is known for its hardware and software powering AI. Given your position at NVIDIA, what are you seeing, Brad?
There we go. Sorry about that. I couldn't get the unmute. Absolutely. We are seeing so much across the board in terms of leveraging compute to solve problems that ordinary computers cannot tackle. Regardless if we're in the healthcare space or in other domains like gaming, like robotics, like self-driving cars, like smart cities, NVIDIA is powering the entire stack from the bottom to the top, right from the hardware layer, from the GPUs for doing that, a whole bunch of processing, all the way up to building systems with our DGX, with our Jetson, with computing at the edge, as well as creating platforms that we run all of our applications on top of, whether it's running on the cloud, doing things like ML ops or remote management, looking at security from end to end, looking at the networking and the data processing unit and bringing data to and from the different systems, all the way up to building those application frameworks that we can build our applications on top of, that are already pre-accelerated so that developers don't have to spend the time working at that lower level, and they're just building the innovations that are driving what we're seeing today. What this looks like from a full stack, all the way from the bottom, we've got our hardware, we've got the servers that the hardware plugs into. As I said, we've got our acceleration libraries, our developer toolkits, and these things work all across the board. So a lot of the intelligence, a lot of our research, a lot of our engineering efforts are building tools that work across all domains. So taking the best and brightest of what we're learning for self-driving cars, for robotics, for smart cities, and taking that up to the level of how do we take this to the verticals? The area that I spend most of my time in is in healthcare. And in healthcare, we have an application framework called Clara. Clara has tooling that allows us to accelerate the workloads in genomics, in natural language processing and natural language understanding, in medical imaging. So this is taking the imaging and deriving insights from it, visualizing it, using cinematic rendering to get views of our organs, of diseases in real time for our clinicians, powering the instruments. So this is being able to take images coming from CT units, from MRI units, and processing that before it even gets to the eyes of our clinicians. Building smart hospitals using healthcare Internet of Things. This is using computer vision to monitor patients, look for temperature screening, and monitor what's happening in our surgery theaters, all the way up to drug discovery and using the best and brightest to find new compounds to develop new treatments for our patients and everything that they deserve. From accelerating solutions, we're there every step of the way to help accelerate breakthroughs in healthcare and life science research. We're powering next generation medical devices. You'd be hard pressed to find a CT or MRI that does not have a GPU inside of it. And we're building solutions that go from the edge at the bedside all the way up to the data center, the nerve center of our hospitals, up to the cloud, and powering those processing. Looking at containerized applications, really write once, run anywhere, to really power and accelerate our developers. Back to you.
Thanks, Brad. Matthew, I'd like to turn to you now and understand the current environment of AI in healthcare and how it's being perceived by the providers.
Well, I think in general, providers always like new toys to play with. But I think it's important to look at it as to what tools can make my life easier, and then what tools can let me do things I couldn't do for patients last year. There's a variety of use cases. When you talk clinicians are practicing in the operating room, but they're also practicing in the clinic. They're also practicing in remote clinics. They're also seeing patients through telemedicine at their house while they're in the office. So there are dozens of specific use cases and nearly all of them can be improved by applied technologies.
Mark, could you jump in here and help us understand why we need AI in healthcare? Mark, I can't hear you. Mark. I'm having audio issues.
That's, of course, I've become a meme. As digitization and digitalization are becoming very commonplace in healthcare, and in a sense accelerated by the COVID pandemic in terms of this concept of digital health, which is a formal concept with the regulators globally. The idea that we will now generate incredible volumes of high dimensionality, high frequency data that previously we were not generating, and now we have to deal with those data. And even more importantly, now we can extract features and information from those data that previously we could not have, to measure things that previously we could not measure, particularly around imaging, as you've just seen a moment ago. AI and ML will become critical in order to managing the availability of humans to interact with those data. It will automate analysis, it will automate data management in a sense, and it will drive decision-making to the point of the sensor. And all of that will facilitate a level of intelligence, of automation, and efficiency when it comes to clinical workflows where appropriate, as we've seen in the example before. So to me, there's a bit of a paradox that AI has become very important now. It's been around since the 50s, right? IoT in medicine has become very important. The funny thing is they need each other. IoT is going to develop the data that AI is hungry for, and AI will be critical to manage the data that IoT is producing. So it's a wonderful confluence of events and technologies.
Mark, I heard you talk a lot about sensors in there. Michael or Brad, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, let me jump in. I mean, on the slides, you may have seen cell counting, and this is a relatively new breakthrough that the Chooch has actually come up with over the last couple of months or so. When you think about typically how we penetrate mobile objects, typically a rectangular bounding box. But what we're doing right here is we're actually using pixel level segmentation and actually identifying the individual cells on these very, very large slides. Now, in order to give a little bit of a background of what the status quo is, typically in bright field microscopy, when say an immunologist takes a look at cells, they throw it onto a slide, they throw a microgrid on there, and this scientist with 2 PhDs and MD is sitting there clicking a counter, actually clicking and counting the number of cells through statistical sampling and getting 80% accuracy. And that's the gold standard. And what the Chooch AI team has done is actually have developed an ability to tile that very large image into segments, count all the cells with 98+% accuracy in milliseconds. So think about all the aspects where scientists all around the world are counting cells at different stages of drug discovery, oncology, and the areas of histology, immunology, right? We're talking about hundreds of millions of hours actually being saved, right, every year, and thereby accelerating the drug development, accelerating the delivery of medicines and effective treatments to people. So this is something that we just rolled out at Chooch. We're very, very excited and excited to talk to a number of folks about this.
I'd also, I mean, from my perspective, that is really mind-blowing. Because when I think about, for example, taking whole slide imaging with pathology and the size of those images, in order to take that and process it, and even to move it around from the microscope to a centralized location, you have to break the laws of physics in order to get it to the point of someone else to be able to review that same level of fidelity of content. Being able to pre-process this information, so we're not moving hundreds of gigabytes, but really just the insights and what's valuable for diagnostic purposes. I mean, it's mind-blowing. It's a game changer. And so, you know, coming from a world of how do I even describe all of the circles that we see in an annotated pathology image, all the way through to just having, you know, the numbers that come out of it, the things that we're deriving from it, it's incredible. It absolutely is. And this is, like I said, getting around how we break the laws of physics to move this content around. So super exciting.
So as you talk about medical imaging, and Michael, I heard you start to talk about a couple of use cases. Matthew and Mark, can you add an example that we haven't touched on yet?
Let me start. Mark, certainly. I mean, there's image-based tools like cell counting, and of course video-based tools. Imaging, there's been some tremendous projects that have been done, and their successes and failures have taught us a lot about the strengths and weaknesses of AI. Whether it's Google's early effort with the retinopathy, which was a fantastic effort, but that example, for example, taught us the importance of clean data and representative data of patients. And in their case, they had a system that worked brilliantly in the sterile environment of the lab, but their processing, they had images which would be uploaded to the cloud. When they took it on a roadshow to Thailand to test it with the principal, they had problems with bandwidth, because the whole purpose of this technology was to give expert level care in faraway regions. Well, these faraway regions had infrastructure problems. That was one early example. So image-based stuff, retinopathy, dermatology, pathology, and it's slide counting, and then we have the video-based arenas of surgery, of course, and robotics, and in between that are the usual static images in radiology, which opens up to tremendous possibilities in image analysis, in patient diagnosis, and also because of this huge wealth of medical digital data now. It's been an exponential explosive growth year after year. We have tremendous warehouses of data with which to look at. The difficulty and a problem that I spend a lot of time thinking about is how to use that data appropriately. And sometimes a one size solution doesn't fit all, because the patients themselves are so unique.
To follow up on that, if I could, some of the work that I've been doing kind of relates to this notion of digital twins. Not digital twins from the industrial perspective, but now from the human perspective, and looking at individual physiological subsystems and modeling those systems such that they can be used as a comparator to an individual. This is not just in the sense of improving diagnosis and potentially how to provide a therapy, but also as a baseline to an individual. So addressing this issue of personalized precision medicine. And so what we've been doing is using imaging, video imaging of balance and motion with a simple accelerometer and gyroscope placed on the back of the neck on the body, and literally building a digital twin using physics and motion as a means of understanding the musculoskeletal system. And these applications can be embedded at the edge, and an individual using their phone or their webcam could actually stand in front of it, go through a simple set of motions, and be assessed for, let's say, how they're progressing after a total knee replacement or a hip replacement, looking at balance and tremors. So the idea then of introducing imaging, video imaging, and physical sensors, gyroscopes, accelerometers, bringing that together, continuous assessment of those streaming data in real time against both standard models and anomaly detection of how you're deviating from that standard model, which then makes it possible to compare people against each other. And then finally, deploying that as a remote patient monitoring scheme, which is now very interesting and reimbursable, of course. So bringing assessment to remote or home locations on the edge, dealing with the data problem as described by Brad earlier in terms of the cloud, and in essence, addressing issues of precision, personalization, value, and cost, all because you can deploy an algorithm with a camera and a sensor, which we all carry, almost all of us, and then use that intelligence to help clinicians better decide about how you're progressing or where to go next. These are not autonomous in the sense that they are in and of themselves diagnostic, rather they're supporting technologies to provide efficiency in that an individual can look at many more patients and get alerted as necessary to focus on the patient that needs help. So again, talking about workflows, talking about efficiency and how analytics can drive that in terms of remote patient monitoring and sensor-based analysis of individuals.
Well, it's the outpatient setting is probably the most important place where healthcare can be impacted, because we want to keep people at home, out of the hospital as much as possible, whether it's wellness or early detection of disease. One benefit of the horrible COVID experience we had was that telemedicine up until now was never really prime time. It was practiced, but really hadn't reached acceptance. In the past year and a half, telemedicine for clinic visits has become the norm, except for those, I would dare say, few cases when a physical examination, and that's an abomination in medicine to say a physical examination is not the most important thing you do to a patient, because that's how medicine was properly practiced for the past 100 years. But with new sensors at home and with a video stream like the one we're on now, everything is digitized. So the question then becomes, how much additional information can we get from this video stream that we're looking at right now? Whether it's simple stuff like pulse rate or general assays of perfusion. There's a bunch of technologies that have been investigated that haven't really hit prime time yet, acceptance yet, but I think in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be an explosion of commercially available and actually used technologies that impact healthcare.
Absolutely, Matthew. And this is this idea of feature extraction from a digitized stream of data, where you're measuring things you could not have measured before, whether it's imaging or even voice, sound. Can you put your microphone to your belly and assess your Crohn's today, or something of that sort. So tremendous opportunity. But I think one of the challenges, as Brad alluded to, how much data, how much dimensionality, how much frequency those data have, and where best to process those data for decision making.
Yeah, from a lot of
If
what
I
I'm
could add,
seeing.
go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, what I was going to say, from what I'm seeing, looking at the different systems that we need to be able to create AI, to build AI, to support it, to store the data, the insights, the annotations, that's what's happening right now. And that's what's super exciting, is that we're seeing a lot of commercialization. It's not enough to say, hey, I have a model that I can feed an image and on a DOS prompt, and then I see some kind of line that says, hey, 0.97 or what have you. But we're actually seeing this. How do we all participate in the creation of AI? How do we all participate in supplying our knowledge, looking at content, taking audio feeds and helping the machines to understand how we classify this? How do we create those systems that make this really easy? And we're seeing this today in integrating into our PACS applications for medical imaging. We're seeing this integrated into our EMR applications. We're seeing a lot of this to be able to do this annotation kind of on the fly while we have some spare minutes of downtime to be able to provide our insights. So it's super exciting, super important, and all of this work helps us in the end. Whether we're clinicians, whether we're IT analysts supporting these systems, or whether we're the patients or the patients' families.
I was going to add to Mark and Matthew's comments regarding telemedicine and imaging. And so, as we all know, we've certainly seen a much stronger adoption back in last year during the height of the pandemic. But now we're talking about access and reach, right? We're also talking about taking diagnostics in a home environment, which are more reflective of your natural state versus going to doctor's office being somewhat nervous. And we're talking about time efficiency as well. So as a doctor speaking to you, or nurses speaking to you, they're taking your vitals, and that can in turn, be thrown back into a hospital setting, right? So there is technology out there that exists today that actually can take your heart rate, your blood pressure, your temperature, and your HRV right now, using a video camera by measuring imperceptible changes, in the skin surface right now. But now imagine applying that back in a hospital setting where you're maybe monitoring 20, 50 people's vitals within a hospital ward, right? And non-invasively having to put a blood pressure cuff on each of their arms, a stethoscope, a thermometer, right? And be able to do this real time, and be able to detect changes that might be able to allow a doctor or nurse to intervene before something actually happens.
I sometimes refer to that as contactless vitals.
It's a wonderful role. In any large hospital, there's a busy ICU, and then there's a step-down unit, which is sick patients that don't quite meet ICU level of care or floor care. These patients are being hooked up to a variety of monitors that typically make alarms go off. And I'm telling you, alarms are going off all the time. There's a real, for the nurses at the bedside and the doctors, there's a real alarm fatigue of false negatives, as well as a role for increased interpretation of these signals actually coming up with a diagnosis. You know, early on, an early adoption, of course, was the big panels of waveforms from EKGs that you might have seen. A TV show with a big wall, and a nurse or a doctor can look at an entire floor worth of patients who are being monitored for telemetry for signs. And if one is particularly bad, that one may flash a little bit to get your attention. But to put some intelligence onto the interpretation of these signals, and to be able to detect clinical states before they become critical. The early signs of a person who isn't breathing well, the early signs of someone who is getting septic, is getting infected. Using AI techniques on the raw digital signal is a tremendous opportunity and is only going to be more prevalent in the years to come.
You know, and Matthew, you mentioned alert fatigue. I've actually worked on projects where there's a fear that if we bring more data and more information, we will simply amplify the alerts and the alert fatigue associated with it. And I kind of argue the opposite. I say that more information actually will give us more data to increase the confidence of an alert, therefore lowering the amount of alerts, and the ones that do trigger are ones that people will pay attention to and act on. And that alert, not simply being a beep, but to your point, it is informed. It's giving you some context as to how best to respond it, and even triage. Who gets the alert? Not everybody needs to get that alert at the same time. So those new data, the higher volume, higher frequency data, driving higher confidence in alerting, and therefore higher confidence in decision-making around that particular patient. So it is paradoxical, but I very much believe that that information will actually lower the problem of alert fatigue.
Look what science fiction shows us when they show us the ICUs, or you're in deep space and you get banged up and you go to the sick bay and a robotic surgeon operates on you with a laser, or your whole body gets scanned with a handheld thing. Those portraits of medicine are fantastic. And as a patient, I would submit myself to that examination because they portrayed a system that works with 99.9% reliability. The characters who play the hologram doctors, one of the Star Trek series, is witty, but you know his medical diagnosis is correct, right? There's a perception, though. There was a Harvard Business Review paper that came out, I think it was early this year or last year, on patients' perception of AI. And in general, they found a distrust of AI because they felt that it was cold and uncaring, and they trusted at that point in time. The authors found that patients wanted a human, certainly in the loop, as far as treatment decisions or so. We're basing our talk here today on clinician uses, but you can't forget to leave the patients out of the equation as well, and their perceptions and their experience using AI.
Of course, the concept today of what's called ethical AI, to what extent is AI capable of addressing those fears and those? If just a quick metaphor that I often use, most commercial airliners, if not all, are fully autonomous. And in fact, pilots flying them are inefficient. They waste gas, they introduce human error, and so on. Yet, we still have two highly trained, exceptionally experienced individuals sitting in a fully autonomous vehicle. Now imagine this as a metaphor for healthcare. Why? What are those humans doing there when they maybe introduce a level of efficiency? Well, in a sense, they are there as quality control managers over the autonomous AI systems driving that airplane. The idea is that let the AI drive and take away a lot of labor and distraction from the humans, allow the humans to focus on what is most important, and possibly anomalous to the point where the machines may not be able in their logic and rigor to deal with. Medicine certainly has that individual relationship with the patient, and possibly looking at influences and comorbidities that may not be obvious to the machine. And so I fully believe in that future where machines will be highly autonomous and do a lot, but they will be essentially enabling humans to focus on really the more human part of medicine, frankly.
100%, Mark. I mean, you think about the workflow of a radiologist, right? And let's just say this, a person is trained, UCLA, Stanford, and she has 20 years of experience and goes through 200 slides a day, right? Maybe 190 of them are no-brainers, or A, B, or C, A, B, or C, except for the triage pile that comes in, you know, where she has to address that. But maybe 190 are A, B, and C, and what does that do with the workflow? Well, then she can use her expertise to focus on the 10 that are maybe edge cases that where the AI is not smart enough quite yet to actually then use her trained eye and expertise and render a judgment or decision, right, much more efficiently, and therefore get a lot more done throughout the course of a day or a week.
And the AI learns from that. And effectively, we reach a sort of asymptotic efficiency of the machine where what is not in that curve is what humans should be paying attention to. And I think there's a future of happy coexistence, Matthew, as you said, in science fiction. The machines didn't take over.
Well, you know, one of the other great use cases in radiology is helping draw attention for the radiologist to disease states. What I mean, at 2 in the morning, an X-ray is done. Who's reading at 2 in the morning? Now, every once in a while, an X-ray at 2 in the morning has an important finding that the clinician wants to know about. But even in the biggest healthcare systems, at 2 in the morning, the staff isn't at full steam, number-wise, as well as being pulled in multiple different directions. And a radiographic study with an important finding can sit certainly unread by the radiologist, but even unread by the clinician who ordered them, because the clinician, although they order it, they don't know exactly when it was done. The reality is you put an order in, and you hope it's going to be done in the next half hour, but systems are complicated and things that should be stats sometimes take several hours. If it's very important, you stand there until it's done, in effect, making multiple calls. But if you'd had a low suspicion that there was going to be a problem, and it was just one of the many things you're taking care of at 2 in the morning, you might not come across that X-ray for a couple hours. An AI system that can pre-screen these studies for the radiologist to find something unusual, that says, of all the studies, it's 7 in the morning now, it's time to read your 100 studies from yesterday. Look at this one first. Or better yet, at 2:01 in the morning, ping someone, just take a look at this one, make sure it's not that's an important use case for radiology that AI is perfect for.
Yeah, I'd say, you know, looking at how we can apply AI in the hospital, it's so hard for to say, yeah, I want AI, because that could mean 10,000 different things. You know, whether it's around helping us triage, being able to help us diagnose, being able to identify organs or identify, you know, pacemakers, identify things in the images. Is the tube placement in the correct spot? There's so much out there, and as we continue to see the development of these AI applications, you know, a great example, I always reference back to a website called gamuts.org, which is put on by the RSNA. And it really itemizes all of the findings that we could find in radiology images. And there's both findings and, you know, things like spiculated or solid cell or semi-solid, like these sorts of findings. There's about 12,000 of them. And so looking at how we can take AI to even address 5% of these is an important step forward. But as we kind of roll forward, building up these enterprise systems to be able to support AI across the board is going to become so important. And it's never about just like in self-driving cars, we have level 5 fully automated self-driving cars. We're at the stage of how do we help the clinicians? You know, it's not clinician versus machine, it's clinician with machine versus clinician without. And I think that rings so very true in so many of these AI use cases and applications where we could actually take advantage of these things.
Brad, I like to hear your comments here. That was really helpful. I don't have any stake in the game here. So I kind of look as the patient mindset, right? And that's something, Matthew, that you brought up, is what is the patient mindset and how can we help as this group here on the panel today? What do you see happening in the next 5 years with adoption? Are the patients open to using AI with what you're using today in the clinic? Is that something that you're seeing adoption or acceptance, I guess, from your patients?
On the one hand, I wonder if the patients really know how much is going on behind the scenes, whether they had a cell smear and it was counted by hand or counted by a camera. There's even medicine is so specialized now that I'm not even sure what goes on in things outside of my specialty. Worlds within any hospital, and any laboratory in a hospital, any clinical laboratory, any clinical department, any clinical practice. So the question of whether patients will accept it, I think has been touched on by here. It needs to be done with a human touch. They need to be brought along the path under the guidance of physicians whom they trust, whose opinion they trust, and I think that's the key to adoption. It'll be their user experience, and that will still at this time be a big part human augmented with AI.
I know bedside manner is important to me as a patient, so I'd love to hear that that's the direction that you all are taking this, and it feels like maybe you're opening us up for another panel to include some patient opinion.
Make a quick comment on that. There was a study done recently, a few years ago out of Europe, where oncology treatment outcomes were measured with humans alone making decisions, and humans supported by algorithms in terms of optimization of dose, of drug-drug combinations, minimizing side effects, so on and so forth. And the conclusion of that study was that the humans with the algorithms outperformed the humans. The final comment that this research group made, speaking about patients, adoption, more data, improving confidence and decision-making, that asymptote about how confident are you? The conclusion of these researchers was that if algorithms in conjunction with humans are outperforming human decision-making, quote, it is unethical to make oncology treatment decisions in the absence of algorithmic support, unquote. Unethical, not inefficient, not wrong, or good decision, bad decision, but unethical. That is, it's going against the primary ethos of treating patients to the best that you can treat them. So it's inevitable. But again, I'll go back to Tiffany, to your point. In the end, the machines will free up humans to spend more time with humans and work on that aspect, as we've discussed before. And I think that new forms of data, extracting information that we couldn't measure before, as we mentioned, particularly through imaging, will be transformative in driving both the confidence in the decision-making and the acceptance that patients will say, well, yes, give me the best possible course of treatment, and that will inevitably involve math.
That's great to hear. I really, I love it. Michael, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think maybe just going back to a theme that we discussed earlier about telemedicine, I only see the advances really kind of accelerating in this space. Mark brings a good point. In addition to the visual, there are also audio components too, right? There are technologies that can determine, and then once you get that, by the way, all that data can be baseline, right? So it's much easier to have an annual or semi-annual checkup and develop baseline using data, right? That's actually being stored. So it could be your voice, wet cough, dry cough. It could be your posture. It could be your heart rate, blood pressure, HRV, temperature, right? I mean, we all have scales, of course, but the more that you kind of adopt using AI on the front end of that, the more time that can be done in terms of diagnosing, analyzing, and talking about, again, back to the human element, interacting with the patient. You're almost essentially creating a virtual diagnostic nurse in some ways. And I think this stuff is coming pretty fast. We've already seen some good examples of it.
Michael, to add to that, I've got a question here I'd like to get answered. We're at 40 minutes, just to give you all an idea. We have a few questions, and one of the questions we have is in regards to aggressive diseases like cancers, and what are we doing, is AI doing from the perspective of screening to help improve patients' survival rates, and perhaps some of this early intervention that you all are talking about. Does anyone have something they'd like to add to that?
I can make a brief comment. I don't want to hijack the conversation. I was actually involved on a project with the Cancer Center at the University of Amsterdam, one of the largest in Europe. And what we were trying to do is to link together various data entities within the Cancer Center. That means the imaging, so the imaging that's done on tumors, the proteomics, right? So looking at the protein expression of the tumor, its surface proteins, genetics and genomics, and pharmacology and toxicology. How do you bring that together, all those massive amounts of information potentially, and then focus in on the individual to see what is the best path forward? Now, again, I'm not a physician, but in oncology, you're balancing many different factors in terms of dosing, in terms of side effects, in terms of quality of life, length of life, survivability, so on and so forth. So it's profoundly complex. And going back to my point that those researchers made earlier, that complexity necessitates, I think, an analysis that goes beyond a team of humans sitting at a table. And then using that best possible understanding across those domains, interacting with the patient and basically, I think, bringing them into their care path and saying, here's what we have. This is as good an information as we can get. You know, what do you think? And so my view of that is that data, bringing highly diverse data together in order to support decision-making, letting the machines do the hard work of filtering and analyzing and clustering, presenting to the human options, and then with that going to the patient. I mean, that seems to me is it's already happening, but it can actually go to the next level with more data.
I'd also add, to give a kind of a real life example, it's not just the hard work, but it's also the tedious work. And so if we look as an example, lung cancers and in CT imaging and looking at nodules, and one of the measurements that we use is something called tumor doubling time. So we look at the nodules, we do a volume calculation of what that nodule is, and we'll compare it to another study from 6 months ago, a year ago, and calculate the doubling time. Something that's benign, that's not cancerous, will stay relatively the same. They'll have a tumor doubling time of like 10,000 days, 100,000, something, you know, a large amount. But something that's aggressive, that's rapidly growing, will see a very small tumor doubling time. If you think about a radiologist who's looking at 100 CT studies a day, and they're presented with a CT lung study right now, and there's 7 nodules, some of them are benign, and maybe 1 or 2 of them are cancerous. The amount of time that they're going to spend manually going through each of those, calculating the volumes, looking at the volumes from a previous report, and then making a call is a lot of work. And they have to do that for every single study that comes across their desk. If we can use AI to calculate the volumes, to look at the volumes from the previous study, to register that against the nodules they're seeing today versus that, and say, here's a list of the 7 nodules, 5 of them are benign, they're not growing, but 2 are particularly concerning. They could be smaller and something that they might not have flagged as a particular concerning issue. But with this information, they can make improved decisions, or at least have the information on hand to take whatever next steps are necessary.
Brad, the researchers are even taking that a step further right now. Their researchers are focused on looking at what have been read as normal CTs in patients who've gone on to develop cancers, and going back to those normal CTs and applying as much digital data as possible, whether it be laboratory data or natural language processing for the medical record, abstracting data, and trying to see which patients went on to develop tumors later. So now we're picking up disease processes before they become what's clinically recognized as a disease. We're taking it, we're advancing, in this case, cancer therapy very far ahead.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Well,
Yeah,
Jen,
Brad, I was talking to your pathology group at NVIDIA about this exact thing, the different stages and the types of cells as they kind of morph. And so even before it's clinically identifiable as a certain type of cancer, what are the pre-stages that you actually could count? And this is a very, very subjective field from what I understand. And being able to use AI to actually exactly pinpoint what stages they are, and actually then aggregating that data could be a lot more preventive than kind of the current state that we have of technology that we have right now.
And to that end, I've also, there's an example where two individuals can look at a patient and make two different decisions in terms of whether to proceed first with surgery or chemo, a decision that has to be made all the time. How do you break that tie, if you will? And there are now imaging techniques that actually will help break that tie through rational data-driven, as you say, historically looking at the trend, and then informing both clinicians. Well, you say surgery, you say chemo, computer says chemo to begin with for the best possible outcome given these expectations.
Mark, I think that's a great closing thought from my perspective. I really appreciate all of you joining us today for this panel. This has been a great discussion, and I look forward to continuing this. So we do have a few questions that didn't get answered, and we have your contact information. We'll shoot out a note with this recording and the answers after this call. Thanks again, everyone, for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you.